Hello there. Today I'm tasting a Gran Reserva Rioja. This is from Viña Real. It's their 2015, and in fact it's labelled as a Gran Reserva Especial. I don't know what the significance of that is, it's not detailed, and that designation doesn't always appear on the label of their Gran Reserva. Viña Real is a company formed in 1920 by a larger producer, CVNE, Compañia Vinícola del Norte, España, or CVNE as we tend to know them these days, as a company to produce a wine from a single vineyard in Elciego. Today the brand has its own identity, it has its own winemaking facilities, and it's run completely independently. It produces wines from Rioja's Alevesa region. The name Vina Real comes from the fact that evidently originally their vineyards ran alongside of the Camino Real, the King's Road, the Royal Road. The company has a very distinctive winery. It was built in La Guardia in 2004, with one large circular hall in particular being clad on the outside with red cedar, making it look like a large fermenting vessel. So fruit from this wine comes entirely from the heart of the Alevesa region. In fact, it's produced only from vineyards from within Elciego itself and from La Guardia. Those vineyards are predominantly the Castellones and the San Ginés vineyard, but more recently they've also started adding fruit from the La Bastida vineyard. These vineyards are small vineyards, they're dry farmed, often on terraces at altitudes of between 500 and 650 metres above sea level. The vines are bush trained, and in general the vines exceed 35 years on average in age. Soil types are predominantly chalky clay, although there are some plots of more sandy soils. These soils are quite low in vegetative matter and thus are free draining and favour low yields. Fruit for the Gran Reserva comes almost exclusively from vineyards that are south facing, so that's where the ripest fruit will be grown. In this vintage the blend is very typical. It's produced from 95% Tempranillo with 5% of Graciano added, so both quite structured varieties. It's a wine designed for aging. The fruit is of course hand-picked, with the vines being bush-trained, it has to be. The fruit on arrival at the winery is carefully sorted, it's then lightly crushed, and it does a 24-hour cold maceration prior to the start of ferment, and this is in stainless steel tanks. Fermentation temperatures, once they start, are regulated to somewhere between 28 and 30 degrees Celsius to stop the extraction of harsh tannins through too much heat, or the shocking of the yeasts by getting too hot, which might produce off flavours. So they're looking to keep the wine quite clean. Fermentation takes place entirely with ambient yeasts, so those yeasts that have found their way into the winery from the vineyard. To ensure good extraction of both tannins and colour, frequent delestages, rack and returns are used, so that the tanks are drained completely, the skins fall to the bottom of the tank, and the juice, the must, is returned to the top of the tank to keep those skins moist, to prevent volatility, and also to extract as much tannin and colour from them as possible, as quickly as possible. After fermentation, the wine is moved by gravity into barrel. This is a combination of French and American oak barrels. The oak used for the Gran Reserva is either new oak or first-year oak, having been used one time before, and the wine stays in these barrels for 24 months. Following blending, the wine is bottled and it's then allowed to age in the estate cellars for at least another 3 years. The wine is labelled as being vegan friendly and therefore wasn't fined with animal products in any way. The 2015 vintage was one that saw Rioja do slightly better than some other Spanish regions in a year where there was drought. Some showers in June helped to keep the vines working in Rioja despite the heat. However, it's a very hot summer, and you'll find those vines that were well established and those regions where the vines grew at higher altitudes that were cooler made more elegant and balanced wines. In general, the wines of Rioja in 2015 are good and concentrated and mostly suited for aging, so hopefully that's what we'll see. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we, and see what we make of it. My first impression is of a wine that's got a good depth of colour. That is very nearly opaque. It's a deep, dark, ruby red. Swirling it, The wine has 13.5% alcohol and actually is forming tears on the glass very readily, so I'm expecting that to be quite tannic, to have plenty of polyphenols in it. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Bizarrely, the aromas seem fairly restrained, and yet there's a sort of an open fruit that is red plums with a slightly sort of high ripeness prune note. There are more developed notes, sort of forest floor, dried leaves, that sort of hint. And within there are touches of cinnamon, spice and cedar, but they're quite gentle, and they're behind this sort of really quite rich, concentrated fruit. The entire set of aromas is beautifully integrated. There is this sort of lovely, rich, plummy note. So let's have a taste and see what we make of it. Tasting that is pretty full-bodied. There's plentiful, very fine tannin. There's a fairly peppery note coming from that. But at the same time, there is some beautiful acidity, giving that lovely sort of, again, rich, slightly cooked plum sort of note. There is a sort of a plum to prune, high-toned note to the fruit. But that is backed up by lovely ripeness. It doesn't become thin and, you know, just taste of dried out prune. It's actually got that lifted, concentrated red fruit note. There's perhaps a slightly chocolatey texture as well. Maybe slightly velvety, but sort of drying velvet there. Although the tannins are drying, they're not sort of mouth-suckingly astringent. There's just enough to sort of give some nice grip there. There is a sort of a meaty note. There's certainly a note of dried leaves, of development, that sort of thing. Although it's not moved on to a sort of an overly developed stage, sort of mushroom, that sort of thing, isn't it? That's not there. This is still clean, concentrated fruit, as you'd expect from something from 2015. In terms of the alcohol, it's actually rounding the back palate out more than I would have thought. It's almost as if there's a touch of glycerol as well. There's something really quite smoothing, almost a sort of a note of blackcurrant pastel, just in terms of texture and in flavour. The finish is quite rich. It's that rich red fruit. There are tiny touches of, you know, cinnamon spice, that sort of thing, and then there's a sort of an earthy forest floor, dried leaves note over the top of that. So I think the wine's got some nice development. It is drinkable now, very happily. Those tannins are smooth, but yet they're giving some quite good grip. At the same time, I think this is also a wine that you could keep for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, very happily, probably 10. You know, such as its concentration, it's got nice acid balance, it's got good firm structure. This is a wine that would age beautifully, and yet at the same time, it has the tannins to counterpoint something. The beautiful marbled fat of a young lamb or something like that. That would work incredibly nicely with that. And there is still some good persistence of those flavours. That was Viña Real's Gran Reserva Especial from 2015. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch the video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope if you've enjoyed it that you will share it with your friends. Do please press the like button if you have. Do leave your comments. We'd love to hear what you think about these wines, about the tastings we're doing. If you'd like to sign up and follow us on YouTube, that would be fantastic. But most importantly, I do hope that you'll make the time to join us for another tasting at some stage in the very near future. Goodbye for now.